The barrel of the gun was pointed straight at my chest. Tiffany's hand shook slightly, but her voice was sharp as broken glass. "I told you," she hissed, "this ranch belongs to me now." I stood there frozen for a second, staring at the woman in front of me. She wore designer boots, a pink sun hat, and a floral dress, like she just stepped out of a fancy garden party. But the cold, angry look in her eyes was anything but sweet. It had all started an hour ago when I saw tire tracks slicing through my pasture. I was just getting back from town, groceries in the back of my pickup, thinking about what I'd grill for dinner. But the second I turned into my driveway, I knew something was wrong. 3 strange SUVs were parked on my land like they owned the place. Folding chairs were set up around my pond, and a group of people I didn't recognize were sipping drinks under a big white tent someone had pitched right there on my grass. A big, ugly wooden sign nailed into the old oak tree read "Future site of Meadowbrook Estates Phase 2, private property." My heart slammed against my ribs. I slammed my truck into park and stormed out. "Hey!" I shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" That's when she appeared. Tiffany. She looked me up and down like I was something she found stuck to her shoe. "This land is part of the HOA expansion project," she said smoothly, as if that explained anything. "You need to leave, sir. You're trespassing." I blinked, confused for a second before laughing bitterly. "Trespassing? This is my ranch. My name's on the deed. I've lived here for 15 years. Tiffany smiled a thin, tight, fake smile. "Not anymore," she said. And before I could say another word, she reached into the pink handbag slung over her shoulder and pulled out a gun. My instincts kicked in fast. I put my hands up slowly, not making any sudden moves. I could hear some of the other people gasping, some stepping back, but not a single one of them tried to stop her. It was like they were expecting this, like this was normal. "You're going to leave now," Tiffany ordered, waving the gun slightly, "or things are going to get messy." My mind raced. I had to stay calm. I had to figure out what the heck was going on before somebody got hurt. I took a slow breath and backed up a few steps, lowering my voice. "Look, lady, there's been some kind of mistake. Let's just put the gun down and talk about this." But Tiffany wasn't listening. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and that's when everything went black. It all started 2 months earlier. Life on the ranch had been good, peaceful. Every morning I'd wake up early, feed the chickens, check on the cows, and walk the fence line with my dog, Buster. My nearest neighbor lived 2 miles down the road, and I liked it that way. Out here, it was just you, the land, and the sky stretching forever. Sometimes I'd drive into town for supplies, maybe grab a coffee at Millie's Diner, where everybody knew everybody. They'd tease me about being the lone cowboy because I didn't have a wife or kids, but I didn't mind. I had my ranch. That was enough. I worked hard for it too, saved every penny after my dad passed and left me nothing but his old toolbox, worked double shifts at the mill until I scraped enough together for a down payment, fixed the place up myself, patched the roof, cleared the fields, dug new irrigation lines. Every fence post out there, I hammered by hand. This ranch wasn't just land, it was my life. That's why it hit me like a punch in the gut when strange rumors started floating around town. It started small, whispers at the feed store, a few odd comments from the mailman. "Hey, you hear about that new development company? Some lady buying up land all over the county? Big plans for a fancy gated community." I didn't think much of it at first. Why would that have anything to do with me? Until one day, I came home and found a piece of paper stapled to my front gate. It was a notice, a summons from something called Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. According to the notice, my ranch had been annexed as part of their community property. They claimed I owed them $1,200 in association fees immediately. I laughed it off. Had to be some kind of scam, right? But the notices kept coming, more official looking each time, threatening fines, threatening liens, threatening seizure. I tried calling the number on the paper, but all I got was a chirpy voicemail recording that never called back. I drove to the county office. The clerk said they didn't know anything about it. No new development was approved, no changes to property records. My deed was still valid. I owned every square inch, fair and square. I thought that was the end of it. Until today. Until I pulled into my own driveway and found strangers claiming it was theirs. And now I was standing face to face with a woman who clearly believed she could take whatever she wanted at gunpoint. My stomach twisted into knots. Buster, my dog, barked furiously from the truck, sensing my fear. Tiffany's finger twitched on the trigger again, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, another black SUV came barreling down the drive. The dirt road kicked up a cloud of dust as an SUV, tires screeching, headed straight for us at full speed. Tiffany turned her head for just a split second to look, and in that moment, I made my move. I dropped low, lunging for the ground, but I wasn't fast enough. There was a deafening bang. Everything around me exploded into chaos. The gunshot tore through the air, loud enough to make my ears ring. I hit the ground hard, face scraping against the dry dirt. For a second, I thought I'd been shot. I checked myself, heart pounding so fast I thought it would explode, but somehow the bullet had missed. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. The SUV screeched to a halt just yards away from where Tiffany and I stood. The door flew open, and a man in a dark suit jumped out, yelling, "Tiffany, what the hell are you doing?" Tiffany turned, still holding the gun, her face flushing bright red. "You said to take care of it," she shrieked. "I'm taking care of it." The man, tall, bald, sweating through his fancy shirt, marched toward her, hands up like he was approaching a wild animal. "Put the gun down," he barked. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. Buster barked louder from the truck, losing his mind. I didn't dare get up. I stayed low, waiting. Finally, Tiffany lowered the gun. Her hand shook so badly I thought she might drop it. The man snatched it from her, stuffed it into his waistband, and spun around to face me. I'm sorry about this," he said quickly. "This is a misunderstanding. A big one. Let's just calm down." I struggled to my feet, brushing dirt off my jeans. My hands were still trembling, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Who are you people?" I demanded. "And what the hell are you doing on my land?" The man gave a tight smile. "I'm Daniel Brooks. I represent Meadowbrook Estates. We're expanding." Tiffany here got a little overzealous. "There's no need to escalate things." "Overzealous?" She pulled a gun on me. I shouted. Daniel's smile faltered. "Look," he said quickly, glancing around nervously, "let's not involve the authorities. We're willing to make this worth your while. Very worth your while." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Even from where I stood, I could see the green edges of $100 bills poking out. "This is just a start," he said smoothly. "There's more where that came from. Sign over the property, walk away, you'll be a rich man." My blood boiled. They thought they could buy me? After trespassing? After pulling a gun on me? I stared at the envelope, then back at Daniel. I spat into the dirt at his feet. "You can't buy me," I said coldly. "Now get off my land before I call the real cops." Daniel's face darkened. The smile vanished completely. For a moment, I thought he might pull the gun himself, but then he nodded stiffly, turned back to the SUVs, and started barking orders. The strangers, Tiffany included, packed up their chairs, their tent, and their ugly wooden sign. It took nearly an hour, but they finally drove off, kicking up a cloud of dust behind them. I stood there the whole time, arms crossed, Buster growling low at my side. When the last vehicle disappeared over the hill, I finally let out the breath I was holding. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The next day, I went straight into town. First stop, the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wallace was an old friend of mine. He was a big man, built like a refrigerator, with a handlebar mustache and a voice like gravel. When I told him what happened, he leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. They pulled a gun on you? He repeated slowly. Yep, I said. Tiffany herself. Right in my face. Wallace whistled low. Well, that's assault with a deadly weapon, he said. At the very least. You want to press charges? Darn right I do, I said. Wallace nodded, scribbled a few notes, then picked up the phone. It took a while, but he tracked down the so-called Meadowbrook Estates operation. Turns out it was a shady real estate scam. They'd been trying to pressure ranchers like me into selling cheap so they could flip the land to big developers. They had no legal claim to my property, none at all. Problem was, proving it in court could take months, maybe years. In the meantime, Wallace promised to increase patrols near my ranch. Keep your head low, son, he said. People like that don't play fair. I thanked him and headed home, feeling a little better. For the next few days, things were quiet. I fixed the section of fence they had knocked down. I cleaned up the trash they left behind. I even replaced the old no trespassing signs with newer, bigger ones. I started to believe maybe, just maybe, they got the message. Maybe it was over. I should have known better. It was Friday night when it happened. I was sitting on the porch with Buster, sipping a cold beer and watching the sunset when the headlights appeared. A single car, creeping slowly down my driveway. Too slow, too quiet. I stood up, heart beating faster. The car stopped about 50 yards away. The engine cut off. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Tiffany. Only this time, she wasn't wearing a sun hat and a floral dress. She was dressed head to toe in black jeans, black hoodie, black gloves, and she wasn't alone. Two other figures got out of the car behind her, men, both of them wearing masks pulled low over their faces. And in Tiffany's hand, gleaming under the moonlight, was another gun. Buster growled deep in his chest, hackles raised. I reached behind me and grabbed the old shotgun I kept by the door, just in case. Tiffany started walking toward the house, slow and steady. You should have taken the money, cowboy, she called out, voice dripping with venom. I raised the shotgun. Get off my property, I barked. She laughed, a cold, chilling sound. The two masked men spread out, flanking her. Buster barked furiously, straining at his leash. And then Tiffany raised her gun and fired. The shot rang out, shattering the peaceful night like a hammer through glass. The bullet hit the wooden post next to me, sending splinters flying into the air. Buster barked wildly, tugging at his leash, ready to charge. I ducked instinctively behind the porch railing, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. Another shot echoed across the ranch, zipping past my head. I gritted my teeth and raised my old shotgun, pressing my back against the house. Last warning. I shouted into the dark. Leave now. For a moment, there was silence, just the wind rustling through the dry grass and Buster's low, furious growl. Then Tiffany's voice came again, dripping with hatred. You had your chance. She screamed. I peered over the railing just in time to see her signal the two masked men with a sharp wave of her hand. Like trained attack dogs, they spread out even farther, trying to circle around the house. I realized quickly this wasn't just intimidation anymore. They were here to take my ranch by force if they had to, and I wasn't about to hand it over. I took a deep breath, feeling the rough wood of the shotgun stock against my palm. My dad's words echoed in my head, when you stand for something you love, you stand all the way. No halfway courage. I moved fast, slipping through the front door and locking it behind me. First thing I did was cut the porch light. No sense in giving them a clear shot. The house plunged into darkness, except for the soft glow of the fireplace embers. Buster stayed close, ears pinned back, ready to defend. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed 911, whispering the situation to the dispatcher. Armed trespassers, shots fired, immediate danger. Stay hidden if you can, sir. Officers are en route, the woman's calm voice told me. But hiding wasn't an option now. Through the kitchen window, I saw one of the masked men creeping along the side of the house, a crowbar glinting in his hand. The other was near the barn, fiddling with something, maybe trying to cut the fence. Tiffany herself was walking straight up the front steps. Another bullet tore through the door frame, inches from my head. I stumbled back, realizing they were trying to force me out, drive me into the open. "Coward!" Tiffany yelled. "This land is mine. Always was. You don't deserve it." I didn't know if she was crazy or desperate or maybe both, but either way, she wasn't getting what she wanted. I needed a plan, and fast. I moved through the house in the shadows, keeping low. My goal wasn't to fight, it was to buy time until the real authority showed up. I had 2 old deer blinds set up near the east field. If I could slip out the back door, circle around, and get to one of them, I'd have better cover and a clear view. I motioned for Buster to stay. He whimpered softly, not wanting to leave me, but obeyed. I cracked open the back door silently and slid into the night. The air was cool, the ground rough under my boots. I kept low, weaving between the big oak trees that dotted the property. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of flashlights sweeping across the field, searching for me. My muscles burned, and every twig that snapped under my foot sounded 100 times louder in the silence. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. I made it to the east blind and hunkered down inside. From my new vantage point, I could see the whole front yard, the broken porch, the battered front door, and the 3 invaders prowling like wolves. Tiffany paced back and forth impatiently, barking orders. "Find him. I want him out." The 2 men obeyed, moving closer to the house. One of them kicked down the back door with a loud crash. My heart clenched. "Buster." I fought every instinct to sprint back, but I had to think smart. If they hurt my dog, there would be no mercy. Suddenly, headlights flared at the edge of the ranch road. Red and blue flashing lights. Sheriff Wallace's cruisers. Backup had arrived. The sirens howled through the night, sending Tiffany and her thugs into a panic. I watched as she screamed at the masked men to finish it, before jumping into her car. But just as they all tried to scatter, Buster burst through the broken door, teeth bared, barking like a beast unleashed. The 2 masked men hesitated just long enough for the deputies to swoop in. Within minutes, the ranch was swarming with law enforcement. Floodlights lit up the yard like it was daytime. Guns drawn, the officers surrounded the car and tackled Tiffany to the ground, disarming her. The 2 masked men were caught trying to run for the trees. I finally stood up from the blind, my legs numb from crouching so long, and slowly made my way toward the house, shotgun still in hand but pointed down. Sheriff Wallace met me halfway, his face grim but relieved. "You all right, son?" I nodded stiffly, tired, angry, but alive. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Come on, let's sort this mess out inside." Inside the house, the deputies worked quickly, photographing the damage, taking statements, and hauling evidence into bags. Buster stayed glued to my side, his tail wagging slowly, almost as if he knew the worst was over for now. Tiffany sat in the back of one of the cruisers, handcuffed, still screaming bloody murder about how the ranch was hers by divine right and how she would sue everybody before the night was through. Sheriff Wallace shook his head. "She's cooked," he muttered. "Aggravated assault, attempted theft, illegal firearm possession. Might even get conspiracy charges depending on what those boys say." I leaned against the porch railing, exhausted. "I just want my life back," I said. Wallace gave me a tired smile. "You will. But it's going to be a fight. People like her, they don't back down easy." In the weeks that followed, the story of the crazy HOA lady who tried to steal a ranch spread like wildfire through town. Millie at the diner offered me free coffee for a month. The hardware store gave me a discount on fencing supplies. Neighbors I barely knew started dropping off pies and homemade casseroles like I was some sort of local hero. But with the kindness came the paperwork, endless paperwork, court dates, legal fees. Tiffany's lawyers filed counterclaims, insisting that she had purchased rights to the ranch through some shady contract that, surprise surprise, didn't actually exist. It didn't matter. Their goal was to bury me under enough stress that I'd eventually crack and settle. But I wasn't built that way. Every time I thought about giving up, I remembered that night, the shots, the fear, Buster barking at my side, and the sick satisfaction on Tiffany's face. No, she wasn't winning. Not now, not ever. One Friday afternoon, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, I was fixing a section of the back fence when I heard a vehicle coming up the drive. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stood up, shotgun within reach but out of sight. A sleek black car rolled to a stop. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit, not one of Tiffany's goons, but someone new. He was tall, with slicked back hair and an oily smile. He waved a stack of papers in the air as he approached. "Good evening," he called brightly. "I'm here on behalf of Meadowbrook Estates." I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. They weren't done. Not by a long shot. The man with the slicked back hair and sharp suit strutted toward me like he owned the place. He held the stack of papers high in one hand, like it was some kind of royal decree. The sun was setting behind him, casting long, twisted shadows across the dirt driveway. Buster stood stiffly beside me, letting out a low rumble in his chest. He didn't like this stranger, and neither did I. "Good evening, Mr. Walker," the man called out, his voice dripping with fake friendliness. "My name's Charles Benton. I'm a legal representative from Meadowbrook Estates." I didn't say a word, just stared him down, arms folded, shotgun resting against the fence post nearby where he could see it, a clear message I wasn't in the mood for games. Charles didn't even flinch. He adjusted his expensive-looking watch and smiled even wider, like a used car salesman who thought he had a sucker on the hook. "I have here," he said, waving the papers, "an official settlement offer. A generous one, I might add. My clients are prepared to offer you double the market value of this land if you agree to vacate within 30 days. I kept my face blank, but inside I was boiling. They thought they could scare me, then buy me. First with fake HOA notices, then with guns, now with dirty lawyers. I wiped my hands slowly on my jeans, taking my time. "And if I don't?" I asked quietly. Charles sighed dramatically. "Well, you see, legal proceedings can be lengthy, expensive, stressful. My clients have very deep pockets. They're prepared to tie this matter up in court for years if necessary. Your life could become very unpleasant." His voice dropped lower, more threatening now. "Or, you could take the money, move on, start fresh somewhere else. No hard feelings." Buster barked sharply, sensing the tension. Charles jumped slightly, stepping back. I smiled coldly. "You tell your clients I said no deal," I said. "And you can get the hell off my land." For the first time, a crack appeared in his smug facade. "You're making a big mistake," he said stiffly. I took a step closer, letting him feel my presence. "No, you made the mistake," I said, "thinking you could steal from the man who built this place with his own two hands." Charles hesitated a moment longer, then spun on his heel and stalked back to his car. The tires kicked up gravel as he peeled away, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. I watched him go. Isting with a mixture of satisfaction and dread, I had won this round, but the war wasn't over. The next few days passed in an uneasy quiet. I stayed busy, fixed the chicken coop, repainted the porch, planted some wildflowers near the fence line. Ordinary things that kept my hands occupied and my mind from spinning into worst-case scenarios. Buster never left my side. He slept at the foot of my bed, followed me around the fields, and growled at every car that so much as slowed down near the ranch. The neighbors were wonderful. Old Mr. Parker from the next ranch over came by with his shotgun and offered to keep an eye out at night. Miss Patty from the diner brought pies and sandwiches. Even the local church group sent a few teenagers to help mend the broken barn door. For a little while, I allowed myself to believe maybe things were finally settling down. Maybe Charles's threats were just empty words. Maybe Tiffany's craziness had burned itself out. Maybe, just maybe, I could go back to living my quiet, simple life. I should have known better. It was a Saturday afternoon when the next blow came. I was out back repairing the old cattle corral when I heard the sound of heavy engines rumbling down the driveway. Two massive black trucks loaded with construction equipment barreled onto my property like they had every right in the world to be there. Behind them, a white van rolled up, and a group of men in orange vests and hard hats poured out like ants. I dropped my hammer and ran toward them, Buster sprinting at my side. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. A man with a clipboard, young, skinny, chewing gum like he had nothing better to do, turned and smiled lazily at me. "We're here to start Phase 2, he said, flipping through his papers. "Clearing land for Meadowbrook Estates. You're standing on private property now, sir." I stared at him in disbelief. "This is my ranch," I barked. He shrugged. "Not according to my orders. Says right here, authorized for demolition and grading work." My fists clenched. Before I could respond, the workers fired up chainsaws and started marching toward my trees. One man climbed into a bulldozer and revved the engine, ready to tear up the front yard. Panic and rage fought for space inside me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I sprinted toward the bulldozer, waving my arms. "Shut that thing down!" I roared. "Now!" The driver hesitated, clearly confused. Then he spotted a black SUV parked at the far edge of the field with Charles Benton leaning against it, arms crossed, sunglasses gleaming in the sun. Charles gave a slow, mocking wave. He was behind this. All of it. A trap, plain and simple. He knew the real courts would take months, even years, to settle ownership, so he was using dirty muscle to force me out, destroy my land before I could fight back. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Not today. Not ever. I sprinted back to the house, grabbing my phone and calling Sheriff Wallace. Faster than you could blink, the dispatcher recognized my name immediately. "They're on their way, Mr. Walker," she promised. But I knew it would take time for the sheriff's men to get here, and by the time they arrived, the bulldozers could already have leveled half the ranch. I had to stall. I grabbed my shotgun, whistled for Buster, and marched right back into the thick of it. The bulldozer roared toward the first oak tree, blade lowered, ready to plow through. I stepped into its path, planting myself firmly in front of the tree, shotgun pointed at the sky. The driver leaned out the window, face pale. "You better move, man," he shouted over the engine. I didn't budge. "You want to tear down this ranch?" I shouted back. "You're going to have to tear me down first." The other workers hesitated, engines rumbling, unsure what to do. Buster barked ferociously, snapping at the air behind them. I saw Charles fuming, talking rapidly into a cell phone. The standoff stretched for what felt like forever. Sweat dripped down my back. My arms ached from holding the shotgun steady, but I didn't move. Not an inch. And then, sirens. Glorious, beautiful sirens. Sheriff Wallace's cruisers tore down the road, lights flashing. Relief flooded through me so hard I almost dropped the shotgun. The construction workers started backing off immediately, throwing their hands in the air. Deputies stormed out of the cruisers, guns drawn, shouting orders. Within minutes, the construction site was a madhouse of shouting, paperwork, and arrests. Charles tried to slip away, but Wallace himself caught him by the elbow. "Going somewhere?" the sheriff growled. Charles paled and pulled out a stack of papers, blubbering about misunderstandings and legal confusion. But it was too late. The sheriff arrested him on the spot for trespassing, destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As Charles was led away in handcuffs, he glared at me with pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "We'll ruin you." I smiled grimly. "You already tried," I said. "And you lost. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." By the time the sun went down, my ranch was quiet again. The bulldozers sat abandoned near the barn, taped off by crime scene markers. The sheriff's men took statements and promised full charges would be filed. Neighbors showed up, some with lawn chairs, some with coolers of beer, and a few even brought fireworks. It turned into a celebration, not because the fight was over, but because we had made it through another battle. Buster slept curled up at my feet, exhausted but happy. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the stars, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, hope. But deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't truly over yet. People like Charles and Tiffany, and whoever backed them, they didn't give up easily. There would be another strike, and next time it would be even worse. I just didn't know how bad until it hit me like a freight train days later, because someone wasn't just after my ranch anymore. They were coming after me. It happened 3 nights later. I was dead asleep, Buster curled up beside my bed, when a loud boom rocked the house. The windows rattled, the walls shook, dust rained down from the rafters. Buster jumped to his feet, barking like crazy, fur standing on end. I scrambled out of bed, heart hammering in my chest, and grabbed a shotgun from its rack. I rushed to the front of the house, stepping carefully through the dark. Smoke drifted through the living room. The smell of burning plastic filled my nose. I threw open the door and froze. My truck, my old faithful pickup that had served me for years, was on fire. Flames licked up from the hood, crackling and spitting sparks into the night sky. Spray painted across the side in big, ugly red letters were the words, "Get out or else." I stood there stunned as the heat pushed against my skin. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the burning wreck that used to be my truck, feeling a strange, hollow ache deep in my chest. Then Buster barked again, snapping me out of it. I grabbed the garden hose, turned the water on full blast, and did what I could to keep the fire from spreading to the house, but it was too late to save the truck. By the time the sheriff arrived, it was nothing but a smoldering black skeleton. Sheriff Wallace stood next to me, his face grim in the flickering firelight. "They're escalating," he said quietly. I nodded, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "This isn't just about the land anymore," Wallace continued. "They want to break you." I knew he was right. First, they tried to scare me off. Then they tried to buy me. Then they sent bulldozers. Now they were trying to burn me out. And if this didn't work, what would be next? Wallace put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I'll post deputies to patrol near the property. Extra watches, random drive-bys. You won't be alone out here." I thanked him, but deep down I knew out here in the middle of nowhere, help could still be 20 minutes away if something happened. I was going to have to defend my home and myself. The next day, I got to work. I installed new motion-activated lights around the house and barn, set up trail cameras along the driveway and fence lines, rigged up alarms that would go off if anyone stepped onto the property without permission. Old Mr. Parker came by with a few of his friends, ranchers, tough men who knew how to handle themselves. They helped me reinforce the doors and windows with heavy wood beams, turning my house into a fortress. Miss Patty showed up with a basket of sandwiches and coffee, blessing the place like she was casting some kind of good luck spell. It touched me more than I could say. I wasn't alone. The town stood behind me. But still, when night fell and the wind whispered through the trees, and Buster paced restlessly by the front door, a knot of fear sat heavy in my gut. I slept with the shotgun next to me, boots on, fully dressed, waiting, watching, knowing it was only a matter of time before they came back. A week passed, quiet. Too quiet. No strange cars, no bulldozers, no mysterious construction workers. It felt like the eye of the storm, calm but heavy with pressure, like the whole world was holding its breath. I spent my days working double time to repair the damage they'd already done. I built new fences, reseeded torn-up fields, hauled away the ruined remains of my truck. Neighbors kept dropping by, offering help and company. I'd sit on the porch with them in the evenings, watching the sun sink low behind the hills, drinking strong black coffee and trading old stories. For a few fleeting hours at a time, it almost felt normal again. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't over. Not until they said it was. It happened on a Sunday morning. I was in the barn repairing a busted gate hinge when Buster let out a furious spark from the yard. I wiped my hands on a rag and hurried outside. That's when I saw it, a sleek, Dark helicopter descending toward my field, blowing up dust and grass like a tornado. Buster barked louder, tail stiff, ears pinned back. I shielded my eyes against the wind, heart pounding. The chopper landed clumsily in the pasture, flattening the wildflowers and rattling the nearby fence posts. The door swung open, and out stepped a man in a sharp gray suit, flanked by two other men who looked like professional bodyguards. The man in the gray suit adjusted his tie and strode toward me like he owned the world. Something about him sent an instinctive chill down my spine. This wasn't Charles Benton. This wasn't Tiffany. This was someone higher up, someone more dangerous. He stopped a few feet from me, smiling coldly. "Mr. Walker," he said smoothly, his voice low and oily. "My name is Victor Langston. I represent the true interests behind Meadowbrook Estates." I said nothing. He glanced around the ranch, nose wrinkling slightly like he smelled something bad. "You have proven stubborn," he said. "More stubborn than we expected." He smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm here to offer you one final opportunity," he continued. "Sell today, walk away, or suffer consequences far beyond what you've experienced so far." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the ground at my feet. "Inside," he said, "is a cashier's check for $3 million cash. Yours if you leave immediately." $3 million. For a second, I almost staggered. That was more money than I could make in a lifetime. It would set me up forever. A new house, a new life, anywhere I wanted. But then I thought about this land, the blood and sweat poured into every acre, the memories, the peace, the freedom. I thought about Tiffany pulling a gun on me, about my burning truck, about the words "get out or else" seared into my nightmares. No amount of money was worth selling my soul. I met Victor's eyes squarely. "No deal," I said. His smile didn't even flicker. He turned slightly, nodding to one of his bodyguards. The man pulled out a slim black tablet, tapped a few buttons, and held it up so I could see. My stomach twisted violently. On the screen were photos? Photos of me at the diner, at the hardware store, even inside my own house, through the windows. They'd been watching me. Following me. Victor's voice dropped to a whisper, almost gentle. "You see, Mr. Walker, you're not just endangering yourself anymore," he said. "Accidents happen. Fires. Break-ins. People get hurt." Buster barked furiously at his side, sensing the threat. I tightened my grip on the shotgun. Victor leaned in slightly, his voice a cold promise. "You'll sign," he said, "or you'll bury more than just a truck." He stepped back toward the helicopter, the bodyguards following. The rotor blades roared to life again. Victor called over the wind, "You have 48 hours to decide." And with that, the helicopter lifted off, sending a fresh storm of dust and fear swirling around me. I stood there, staring up at the sky long after they disappeared from view. 48 hours. A clock ticking over my head. For 2 days, I lived under the weight of Victor's threat like a heavy storm cloud hanging right over my head. Every sound outside made me jump. Every car that drove past the property made Buster growl low in his throat. Every shadow stretching across the fields made the hair on my arm stand up. I barely slept. I barely ate. I kept the shotgun loaded and ready, sleeping with it across my lap while Buster dozed fitfully at my feet. But deep down, I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I was ready. I wasn't running. I wasn't selling. And I wasn't giving up. This was my home, and if they wanted it, they were going to have to come through me to get it. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. On the evening of the second day, exactly 48 hours after Victor Langston's visit, I felt it. That shift in the air. The way the wind died down. The way the birds fell silent. The way Buster stiffened beside me, his whole body going tense. Something was coming. I stood up from the porch chair where I'd been sitting, shotgun in hand, and scanned the long dirt road leading up to the ranch. At first, there was nothing, just the fading orange glow of sunset behind the hills. Then, headlights. Not one, not two, 5, 6, 7 black SUVs speeding down the road like a pack of wolves. I cursed under my breath. This wasn't a visit. This was a raid. Buster barked furiously, pacing back and forth. I grabbed the walkie-talkie Sheriff Wallace had given me. "They're here," I said quietly. "See 7 vehicles. Armed, probably." Wallace's voice crackled through the speaker. "Hold tight, Walker. We're en route." But I knew help was at least 15 minutes away, maybe more. By then, it would all be decided. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm settle over me. No more fear, no more waiting. Just me, my land, and whatever came next. The SUVs skidded to a stop just inside the property gate. The engines didn't even shut off. The doors flew open, and a dozen men poured out, dressed in black tactical gear, bulletproof vests, helmets, weapons slung over their shoulders. At the front of the pack, stepping out of the lead vehicle, was Victor himself, calm, smiling like he already thought he had won. He cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, "Last chance, Walker. Come out and sign, or we take it all." I didn't answer. Instead, I moved quietly through the darkened house, flipping switches hidden along the walls. Instantly, the floodlights I'd installed around the property blazed to life, bathing the front yard in harsh white. GHT, the intruders blinked, caught off guard. "Good boy," I muttered to Buster, who growled low, staying close to my leg. I moved to the upstairs window, shotgun steady. From my vantage point, I could see the whole front field. Victor stepped forward, looking up at the house. He raised a megaphone and spoke, his voice booming, "You can't win this, Walker. You're alone." I smiled grimly. He was wrong. I wasn't alone. Because as he spoke, a low rumble filled the night, and from the tree line on the east side of the property, the cavalry arrived. Old Mr. Parker's pickup truck tore across the field, headlights blazing. Behind him came 3 more trucks, neighbors, ranchers, men and women from town who had refused to let me stand alone. They spilled out of the trucks, shotguns and hunting rifles in hand, faces grim. Victor turned to his men, shouting orders. I could see the hesitation in the mercenaries' eyes. This wasn't what they signed up for. They thought they were jumping one stubborn old rancher. They weren't ready for a whole community rising up to defend him. Victor raised his hand, and his men rushed forward. The battle for my ranch had begun. The first wave came fast. They tried to swarm the house, shouting and cursing. Buster barked wildly, tearing back and forth across the porch like a demon unleashed. I fired a warning shot into the air, the blast echoing like thunder. The neighbors lined up along the fences, weapons raised. "Turn back!" Mr. Parker bellowed. "This ain't your land, and you sure as hell ain't welcome here." For a moment, the attackers hesitated. Victor snarled something I couldn't hear, and 2 of the men charged the front door. I braced myself, but before they could reach it, Buster sprang forward, teeth flashing. He grabbed one by the arm, dragging him down with a ferocious snarl. The second man stumbled backward and got tackled by Mr. Parker, who moved surprisingly fast for an old guy. The invaders faltered. Victor screamed at them to keep going, but it was too late. The ranchers, the neighbors, the people of the town, we fought like men and women defending more than just land. We fought for family, for honor, for everything that mattered. The attackers broke ranks and ran. Some made it back to the SUVs and tore off into the night. Others were tackled and pinned down until the sheriff's cruisers, lights flashing, roared onto the scene. Wallace himself tackled Victor to the ground, slamming a pair of handcuffs onto his wrists. "You're finished, Langston," he barked. Victor spat on the ground, glaring up at me. "This isn't over, Walker," he hissed. I stared down at him, calm and steady. "Yes," I said. "It is." The cleanup took hours. Deputies swarmed the property, taking statements, photographing everything. Paramedics treated a few scrapes and bruises, mostly on Victor's hired thugs. Miraculously, none of the defenders were seriously hurt. Buster got a whole plate of barbecue from Miss Patty for his bravery. I sat on the porch steps as the sun began to rise, a cup of strong coffee in my hand, Buster resting his head on my knee. Sheriff Wallace sat beside me, shaking his head slowly. "Hell of a night," he muttered. "Yeah," I said quietly. He turned to me, a serious look in his eyes. "You know they'll try to find some legal loophole, some way to wiggle out of this." I nodded. "I'll be ready." He smiled slightly. "I believe you will." He clapped me on the back and stood up, walking back to his cruiser. I sat there for a long time after he left, watching the sky turn pink and gold, exhausted, sore, but whole. We had defended the ranch. We had defended home. But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't truly over, because there was one last card Victor Langston hadn't played yet, and when he did, it would change everything, a threat hanging over everything I loved. And I knew with a sick certainty that they meant every word. I thought the war was over after the failed raid, after Victor Langston was dragged away in handcuffs, after the town rallied to my side. I truly believed we had won. But evil doesn't die easy. It crawls, it hides, and when you least expect it, it strikes the final blow. The final blow came 2 weeks later. I was working on repairing the old south fence, the one nearest the back pasture, when I saw the black SUV parked on the dirt road outside the property line, engine running, windows tinted, watching. Buster stood at my side, growling low. I narrowed my eyes, feeling the old tension coil in my chest again, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was nothing. I went back to hammering the fence post into place. Minutes later, the SUV peeled away in a cloud of dust. I thought that was the end of it, until I got the letter. It was slipped into my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. I tore it open on the porch, feeling Buster's watchful eyes on me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed neatly, precise, cold. Final notice. All your efforts have been wasted. Meadowbrook Estates now owns the mineral rights beneath your ranch. Drilling commences next month. You have no legal standing to prevent it. You can stay and watch your land be destroyed, or you can leave. The choice is yours. You have 7 days. At the paper, feeling the ground tilt beneath me. Mineral rights. I hadn't even thought about them when I bought the ranch all those years ago. The title had been complicated, old land grants, tangled history. I owned the land on the surface, but not necessarily what lay beneath. And now Victor had found a way to win without lifting another gun or bulldozer. They didn't have to steal my home, they could just destroy it, rip it apart from under my feet, turn my fields into drilling pads, my ponds into toxic waste pits. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. This ranch wasn't just land to me, it was my life, and they were going to tear it apart. The next day, I sat in the town lawyer's dusty office, staring at the paperwork. He confirmed what I already knew. The mineral rights had been quietly purchased months ago, bundled and sold off by a distant corporation tied to Meadowbrook Estates. Technically legal, morally disgusting. There were laws to protect surface owners, but the process was long, expensive, complicated. Victor was counting on that, counting on me not having the money, not having the energy, not having the fight left in me. I sat there, staring at the yellowed contract, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. You could fight it, the lawyer said quietly, but it'll take time. Years, maybe. I thought about long court battles, lawyers draining my savings, my land bleeding oil and chemicals in the meantime. Victor had set the perfect trap. One way or another, he thought he would win. That night, I sat on the porch, staring up at the stars. Buster lay beside me, silent. The wind stirred the dry grass, the crickets chirped, and inside me, something hardened, a cold, fierce determination. They wanted me to roll over, to give up, to walk away, but I wasn't built like that. I thought of my father's voice again, the one that carried me through every storm in my life. When a man fights for what's right, he fights until the last breath. Not for money, not for pride, for honor. I looked down at Buster, who thumped his tail softly against the porch. "Looks like we're not done yet, boy," I whispered. He licked my hand once, strong and steady. I had an idea. A crazy, dangerous idea. One chance to save my ranch, and it was now or never. The next morning, I called every neighbor, every rancher, every friend I had left. I explained the situation, the drilling, the destruction coming, and I asked for help. Not money, not lawyers. Something bigger, something louder, something they couldn't ignore. It took 3 days to plan it, 3 days of secret meetings, whispered calls, sleepless nights. And then, on the 4th day, we acted. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. Victor Langston arrived at the ranch at noon sharp. He wasn't alone. Behind him came 2 huge drilling rigs, ready to tear into the earth. He stepped out of his black SUV, smug as ever, adjusting his gold cufflinks like a king surveying conquered land. He didn't even see the people at first. Hundreds of them, lined up along the fences, standing shoulder to shoulder, men, women, children, some on horseback, some holding banners, some carrying American flags high in the wind. The whole town united. Victor's face twisted in confusion. "What is this?" he barked. Sheriff Wallace stepped forward, hat low over his eyes. "This is a peaceful assembly," Wallace said calmly, "protected under the First Amendment." Victor laughed bitterly. "You think some farmers with pitchforks are going to stop a lawful drilling operation?" "No," Wallace said. "But the media might." He nodded toward the line of news vans parked along the road, cameras rolling, microphones extended.